Father in heaven, we thank you for the fellowship and the lunch and all that you've provided for in our conversations. Father, one thing I think we're coming to realize is this equality and taking down every prejudice and every hypocrisy in us is very revealing to each one of us personally, because where one area might affect one person, 10 others might affect ourselves. And so I just ask you to help us through your strength, Lord, and through your wisdom, that we would see things through heaven's eyes, that we could truly learn to see, Father, the work that you're doing, the work that you want to do through us, that you see it as two classes of people, the lost and the saved. We have no idea who's on which side, Lord. All we can do is trust you. If we're called to go up to a man with a gun in his hands ready to shoot us, or if we're meant to stay away from such a situation, truly we can't make these decisions without you. Because when it comes to the salvation of a soul, that's what I pray we all become about, no matter what. And so I just thank you and praise you, Lord, for your grace and your patience with us as we are navigating in, or you're navigating us into some new territory within our own hearts, that we could be fully prepared and armed for this battle in heaven's way. May you continue to bless us through this next presentation, Lord, as we're going to finish the equality study and then go into the next class. I just pray that we would all come through this, Father, with a deeper understanding and a greater need to search our hearts and to ask you to show us every crevice of our hearts, Lord, that there might be anything hidden in there that needs to be expelled. So bless us through the rest of this afternoon. We praise you and thank you and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I think everybody decided to pick up where we left off and then go to the next study. Is that right? And we left off at page 14. So give me just a second to whip through and get us there on the slideshow. I don't know any other way than to do it this way. Is there a faster way to whip through them that you know of? Down on that bottom thing? Just to get to page 14. Where's my mouse? There we are.
If you click the search tool, what would that have done?
I don't know.
Well, that's magnifying glass.
That didn't get me where I wanted, and that didn't help. Okay, let's see here. But now we know. I think we were here, correct? Jim Crow laws.
We're past this.
We just finished that one. Oh, we did separate but equal.
Keep
That's,
going.
I think, where we were at. Yeah. This is Brown versus Board of Education. Everybody can see okay?
Yes.
Here, okay. So we went through the Jim Crow laws, and then what separate but equal means. So you're either equal or you're not. There's no separate but equal. Either equal or you're not. And this is Brown versus Board of Education. 1954 was a landmark decision of the United States Supreme Court in which the court ruled that American state laws establishing racial segregation in public schools are unconstitutional, even if the segregated schools are otherwise equal in quality. Handed down on May 17th, 1954, the court's unanimous 9-0 decision stated that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and therefore violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. However, the decision's 14 pages did not spell out any sort of method for ending racial segregation in schools, and the court's second decision in Brown 2 only ordered states to desegregate with all deliberate speed. The decision involved a case that originated in Topeka, Kansas, where the public elementary schools had been segregated by race since the late 19th century. In 1951, the Topeka Public School District refused to enroll the daughter of a local Black resident, Oliver Brown, at the school closest to their home, instead requiring her to ride a bus to a segregated Black elementary school further away. The Browns and 12 other local Black families in similar situations then filed a class action lawsuit in the United States federal court against Topeka Board of Education, alleging that its segregation policy was unconstitutional. A 3-judge panel of the U.S. District Court of the District of Kansas rendered a verdict against the Browns, relying on the Supreme Court's precedent in the 1896 case Plessy versus Ferguson, in which the court ruled that racial segregation was not in itself a violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause if the facilities in question were otherwise equal, a doctrine that had come to be known as separate but equal. The Browns, then represented by NAACP Chief Counsel Thurgood Marshall, appealed to the Supreme Court, which agreed to hear the case. The court's decision in Brown partially overruled Plessy versus Ferguson by declaring that the separate but equal notion was unconstitutional for American public schools and educational facilities. It paved the way for integration and was a major victory of the civil rights movement, a model for many future impact litigation cases. In the American South, especially the Deep South, where racial segregation was deeply entrenched, the reaction to Brown among most white people was noisy and stubborn. Many Southern governmental and political leaders embraced a plan known as massive resistance created by Virginia Senator Harry Byrd in order to frustrate attempts to force them to desegregate their school systems. 4 years later, in the case of Cooper versus Aaron, the court reaffirmed its ruling in Brown and explicitly stated that state officials and legislators had no power to nullify its rulings. I know I had a point here that I wanted to make, the American South and the Deep South, because we talked about that once before, where back in the time of the Civil War, that it was the Southern states that were mostly Democrats, but it was the Southern states that were pro-slavery. And so now we see that things are reversed and the Southern states are Republican, but it says that their racial segregation was deeply entrenched because they grew up. And that's kind of what we were talking about at lunch. They're born into this bondage of this belief system. So, and just a look at some of the signs: these public premises and the amenities thereof have been reserved for the exclusive use of white persons. And these are the type of things that you saw. And so this, the link to read this whole article is down here as well. You can look at an oral history of Trump's bigotry. It's when it comes to my mind at thinking as we're looking at the no buy and sell as to whether or not it's an actual decree or law or just an effect from a cause. And again, I don't know if it's eventually going to be a actual decree, but we can see surely there's a cause in place that is preparing people. They already how do I want to say, Trump's attitudes on white nationalism is rising up people and pitting people against one another. So we're only one step away from us being the ones that everybody's pitted up against each other. So the purpose of this is for all of us to grow a better understanding of having tolerance. I don't know if tolerance is the right word. As Adriana put it, we're all going back to the liberal side of Adventism, that we just love one another, but with a greater understanding and a right perspective. But we need to understand that these things are already happening in this world today. So this is some of the comments that were made on this particular website. It's his racism and intolerance have always been in evidence. Only slowly did he begin to understand how to use them to his advantage. Bring back the death penalty. And you know what? I have to say that I heard this talked about, but I never looked into it to what it was. And when it came up in this, I was like, oh, that's what that was, because this came up many times in the election and it still comes up. And so probably you guys all know about it, and I'm just a little slow to catch on. But the so-called Central Park Five were a group of, yeah.
Sorry, before we continue, Sister Ali has a question. She says, I think she's saying, is the case of what could be a Sunday law or racism? Just the thought, the case of Brown versus Ferguson is from 2014. I don't understand her question very much. Sister Ali, can you explain your question?
I think she's equating it with the Sunday law, right?
Yeah, hi. I'm just asking because I'm listening to Elaine and I just went into Google to see this, and it brings us to 2014, knowing that there's a Sunday law in 2014, but Elaine is teaching about racism. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or do they come together for 2014?
I'm not talking about the Sunday law right now. I'm talking about in general, looking at equality, and racism is a part of it.
Okay, and that's all oppression, though, right?
It's all what?
Oppression. It's all about being oppressed.
Yeah.
I do think that Brown versus Ferguson, since it's in 2014 and like we were talking earlier, it propagates the idea of inequality. I think it does, all these things obviously all fit in our waymarks because they're important. So.
Okay, I was just tying it together. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you guys.
No, that's okay. So the so-called Central Park Five were a group of Black and Latino teens who were accused wrongly of raping a white woman in Central Park on April 19, 1989. Donald Trump took out full-page ads in all four major New York newspapers to argue that perpetrators of crimes such as this one should be forced to suffer and be executed. In two trials, in August and December 1990, the youths were convicted of violent offenses, including assault, robbery, rape, sodomy, and attempted murder. Their sentences ranged from 5 to 15 years in prison. In 2002, after the discovery of exonerating DNA evidence and the confession by another individual to the crime, the convictions of the Central Park Five were vacated. The men were awarded a settlement of $41 million for false arrest, malicious prosecution, and racially motivated conspiracy to deprive them of their rights. Trump took to the pages of the New York Daily News, calling the settlement a disgrace. During his 2016 presidential campaign, Trump would again insist on the guilt of the Central Park Five. Yeah.
Okay, because I tuned into some of the documentaries and stuff about this case of the Central Park Five, and what they were innocent, and they just got caught up at the wrong time. Were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it is just really messed up what they experienced through all of that being innocent. I just want to put emphasis on that because, and then for Trump to say all he said, and even after it was proven to show that they were innocent and they suffered for something they didn't do, and Trump still hasn't apologized, or all those who put it on them still hasn't apologized or anything of that sort. That just shows something about others' characters in that. And I just want to put that out there because when looking at how they are today, some of them have some issues that
forever changed their life.
Exactly, and some of them are ill, like they can't even talk right, like they didn't even have a regular high school experience to be educated, and all of those things, and you can just hear it when they speak, or even just in the silence. Some of them can't even talk right because of just not having that education and just being in that kind of environment. Some of them experience abuse, So I just wanted to say that.
So I'm pretty sure, I don't remember if I included it in here, but we'll see as we read through it.
Yeah, it says it.
Oh yeah, his ad ran May 1st. Okay, so we're going to get to that part because the actual incident was April 19th. So I think the names of these, I know some of them, maybe all of them are the guys. Maybe Christy or Victoria knows that. I think it's all the people that were involved. Yeah, that's them. So I'm just going to read their statements. Their names are there. For the first one, for him to say, you know what, and this is talking now, I believe. You know what, I'm going to take out an ad and I'm going to call for the state to kill these individuals. It was almost as if he was trying to get the public or somebody from the darkest places in society to come into our homes. Remember, they had published our phone numbers, our names, and our addresses in New York City's newspapers, so they were pariahs. And the next one says the defendants were afraid for their own safety and for their families. These were not people who had substantial means to protect themselves with security guards or who were living in some gated community. And then goes back to the first guy. Think about when they took our DNA and they tried to match it against what they had. And there was no match, and they still moved forward. The spiked wheels of justice continued to roll down the hill and mow us down. And all of this on the heels of what Donald Trump had published. Donald Trump's ad was vicious. It was very disrespectful of what the law is supposed to be about. The next one is, I have children and I can't imagine my son being in prison from age 14 to 21. You're stealing the most innocent part of somebody's life. None of these kids had ever had any real interactions with the law before. When they were finally vindicated, there was never an apology from Trump or even a hint of an apology. Donald Trump's ad ran on May 1st, 1989. The crime had happened April 19th. We hadn't even started trial. That was just a few weeks after we were accused. He put nails in our coffin. He's continuing to do that by continuing to say that we are guilty, by continuing to say that the police department had so much evidence against us. What evidence did they have that stuck? They had no evidence. They had manufactured false confessions. In 2016, this is 26 years after the case and 14 years after it had been proved that none of these defendants had anything to do with that rape, Donald Trump said, I still believe they're guilty. And I guess in his mind, he would suggest that they still should be executed. He trusts his gut on issues surrounding race because he's got a simplistic, deterministic, and racist perspective on who people are. I think at his core, he has a genetic understanding of what makes people good or bad or successful. And you see it all the time. He talks about people having good genes. He looks at the world that way. He's got a very Aryan view of people and race.
Can I point something out?
Uh-huh.
Only 4 of them in this part you have of them speaking. Only 4 of them are speaking. One of them is silent in there. Not saying that he didn't, but there was one.
I didn't include everything, but you can go back and read the article because I think I included all the statements, but I don't know, I don't remember for sure because there was 4 separate things that were listed. This was just one of them.
Yeah, but I know that one of them doesn't speak very much in that group.
Okay. So if that was his attitude then, and this was before they even went to trial, what, May 1st, is that what it said? Let me find it again.
Yeah.
May 1st, you're looking at what, 10 days, 11 days, 12 days? Later, he's saying that they need to be executed. And to this day, knowing that they were proved innocent, that they still deserve to be killed. Well, he didn't say that. He said that he still thinks they're guilty.
You know, Sister Elaine, if we want an antithesis of everything God is calling us to as priests, we could look at Trump, who feeds on conspiracy theories, who is a racist, a sexist, and on the list could go. And I think in some ways that's the juxtaposition, you know, that we need to keep in mind, that as God digs deeply into the recesses of our own hearts individually, there is a contrast. there is Christ, and then there is the man who, in his tweet, claimed to be. Yeah, just joking, supposedly, but so there is a parable even in this.
Yeah. And you can go and click and read that whole article. There were some very revealing things. It's just and the only reason I included some of that is because race is now an issue, equality is an issue, sexism, feminism, all these things are coming up issues, and they're all meant for our good. They're brought up for a reason, because we have some of these things to some degree without understanding it within our own hearts. We have our own prejudices, or I don't want, and maybe prejudices is the right word, but just things that we grew up as, this is the way it is. And God wants to undo all of that and make us into heavenly citizens, so much so that people will see his glory in us. And there will be no glory in us. His glory will not be in us if we still have prejudices or judgment on anybody, because it's two classes of people, the lost and the saved. It's not the ones that did this, and that's way worse, or that because this is worse, because everybody has their own idea of what might be worse. It's down to the two classes of people, and he wants us to not judge either. How do I want to say? His people are not going to judge the sin of the person, because they're going to know that we were born into slavery. And this article, I think, kind of helps with some of that about being born a slave. And then this is the end of this. There's 2 pages of this article, and then it's the end of this study. And again, this was, I don't know if it was even well-ordered study, but hopefully it's been helpful, because it was kind of a last-minute thing to try to fit in here. So and this is, I think, A.T. Jones still. Where sin abounded, Romans 5:21 says that sin hath reigned. And to reign is to hold and exercise sovereign power, to exercise commanding influence, to dominate, to exercise control over, control as by right or superior force, to prevail irresistibly, exist widely, or to the exclusion of something else. That is what the Word of God says that sin does in men and with men as they are of themselves. And until that fact is recognized, no man can be delivered from the power of sin. The word used and translated reigned is a word that signifies and relates to governments and the reign of sovereigns. And when the Word of God thus speaks, it wants us to understand that men in sin are under the government and sovereign power of sin, just as men who are in an earthly kingdom are under the power of that government. Again, the scripture describes the condition of the sinner thus: I am carnal, sold under sin. In these times, a man who was sold was a slave and was in all things absolutely subject to his master. Why then is this statement used with reference to men under sin, unless that is the actual condition of men under sin? Yet more than this statement was originally written to the saints who were in Rome. The figure was taken from the Roman system of slavery. And when the brethren in Rome read it, it was the system of Roman slavery that was suggested, and that was intended to be suggested to their minds as an illustration of the condition of the sinner under the power of sin. Now the Roman government was a sheer despotism of the worst sort. The relation of the government to the citizen was such that he was but a slave. Who has not read or heard these words? The Roman Empire filled the world, and when that empire fell into the hands of a single person, the world became a safe and dreary prison for his enemies. To resist was fatal, and it was impossible to fly. That was the condition of a citizen under the Roman government. But the figure used in this scripture is not of Roman citizenship, but of Roman slavery. And when that was the condition of the Roman citizen, what must have been the condition of the Roman slave? Roman slavery was a system of bondage imposed upon men by a government that stood toward its own citizens as this quotation describes. The slave was confirmed in the hands of his owner by such a government as this. The master had absolute power in all things, even to life or death, over the slave. The owner could torture his slave to death or kill him out of hand, and no one could question it. For the government, such a government confirmed the owner in the absolute possession and control of the one whom he had bought with his money. And the figure furnished by that system of government and of slavery is adopted by the Lord in defining the relationship of the sinner to sin and the condition of the sinner under the power of sin. So he's comparing here being a slave to Rome and to being using that as an example as slavery to sin. And the condition of the sinner under the power of sin. And the lesson which we are taught in these words of Scripture and which we are expected to learn from these words is not simply the fact of sin, but the power of it. And if people would only see this more and recognize it so, there would be more salvation from sin in the world and among those who profess to be Christian. And there would therefore be much more Christianity in the church. This same thought is expressed in the same way by Jesus in the following words, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin." This is the way the King James Version reads. And so on the face of this text, its force is lost. For when people read it nowadays, they know that the position of servant is such that he can leave at any time and cease to be a servant. Looking at it that way, they decide that they can leave the service of sin at any time by their power, by their own power, and by their own power cease to be servants of sin. But this is not what Jesus said. What he really said is this, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is a slave of sin." The Greek word is doulos and signifies properly a born bondman or slave. Note, it is not simply one made a slave, but one born a slave. That is what Jesus said, and that is what the word says, yet to everyone that is under the power of sin. Thus, in the words of Christ here, as in other places, it is the power of sin over the sinner, rather than the fact of sin upon him, that is taught, and that he wants men to understand. And he wants to understand that this power is properly illustrated only in the system of Roman slavery as it was then in the world. This power is shown to be such that in its reign, in its mastery over the man who knows only the birth to slavery, the natural birth, it keeps him back from doing the good that he would do, and that he loves and causes him to do the evil that he would not do, and that he hates. For it is written, "I am carnal, that do I not, but what I hate that I do. The good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not that I do. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not." But why is this? Why is it that a man does the evil that he hates? Why is it that, thinking about the demoniac that we were talking about during lunch, why is it that he does the evil that he hates? Why is it that he does not the good that he would? Why is it that he cannot perform the good that he wills? Oh, it is not more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. I would not do it, but sin that dwelleth in me causes me to do it. I would do good, but sin that dwells in me holds me back and will not let me do it. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me? How could the supreme, sovereign, and absolute power of sin be more plainly shown than it is in the scriptures cited in this article? And how could the complete, abject, and helpless slavery of a man who knows the natural birth be more fully depicted than in these same scriptures? Oh, that men would believe it. Oh, that they would recognize it and confess it always. Then they would be delivered. For there is deliverance. There is deliverance as complete as is the captivity. There is freedom as absolute as is the slavery. There is the reign of another power as certainly supreme and sovereign as was ever the power of sin. But until we recognize and confess the power of sin as the Word of God declares it, we cannot know the power of God declares it. We cannot know the power of God as the Word of God presents it. Until we acknowledge the complete sovereignty of the power of sin, we cannot acknowledge the complete sovereignty of the power of God. I thought that was a really good article.
Yeah. That's the thing that we have to understand, that all of us, no matter how you name that sin, we're all taken by the devil and we're under sin.
Born in slavery.
Yes.
Born in slavery.
One, somebody else has something else, somebody else something else. We're all slaves.
Yeah. And he wants to set us free from that slavery. So we are all born into slavery, and until we recognize that fact, we cannot have the complete sovereignty of the power of God over us. So any questions or comments on that? Everybody's silent? Nobody? I'm going to set up the next slideshow here, if I can here. There we go. No questions before we go forward, you guys? Anybody? Okay. I'll say you had your chance. No, I'm just kidding. So going into the next class here, information war, and this was class number 31. Give me just a second to set it all up. Don't change anything, Adriana. We're getting it well oiled.
I didn't do anything.
No, I know you didn't.
Oh.
And then going forward, I'm finally getting this one oiled down.
I remember now what you mean.
Oh, yeah. So many changes.
It's a projector next.
Yeah.
I think we're fine here with this.
Okay. So picking up where we left off, we're going to look at 2014, and we'll be looking at connecting our waymarks. We've talked about threading the needle and connecting our waymarks. So if something is going to happen, you could actually trace its history of development. That would go along with cause and effect then, right? You could trace its development. This becomes important as we come to our close of probation. Part of the test is recognizing what it looks like, so that on the day we're not shaken if it doesn't fit our expectations. And remember, we talked about that 3 parts to the midnight cry. 1 is knowing the date, and 2 is knowing what it means and what is going to happen. And the 3rd, which is one that seems to be a struggling factor, is getting rid of our Protestant and whatever our ways of thinking that are in us that need to be removed. So that is all encompassing our test. If we only know the date and we don't have the other parts understood and overcome, then we're liable to fail that test. Well, remember our 4 lines, and what we saw was Pyrrhus in Macedonia, his history. Then we saw Pyrrhus in Italy, his Omega history. We understood that this Alpha and Omega typified the Alpha and the Omega in our time. The Alpha of the King of the South. Who is the King of the South in our history? Our history is Putin. And who does Pyrrhus represent in the last part of our history? So the King of the South is Stalin and then Putin. Vladimir Putin, the King of the South today. When we compared Pyrrhus and Putin, who was our Alpha? We said that Pyrrhus was the 10th king. Vladimir Putin could also be seen as the 10th. And this took us back to World War II in the history of Stalin. When Stalin is king of the South, what was he ruling? is ruling the USSR, the Soviet Union. So Stalin is the first and Putin is the 10th. In the history, World War II, it wasn't Russia, it was the USSR or Soviet Union. So the king of the South in the Alpha history is Stalin. And then Russia was the king of the South in the Omega. The Alpha is the history of World War II. These are the 4 lines that we've been studying previously. And if you remember the big one that we had, the big page that had them all stacked up on top of each other with all the events. What we did without noticing was to form natural conclusions from these histories. What we find is that Pyrrhus in both histories, we can see 4 battles. Ipsus in the Alpha history, but then there were 3 battles after Ipsus in the Omega history. Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. We see when we combine the history of Pyrrhus, we could see 4 battles. When we made application, we had to understand the 4 battles in our history. We saw that the first battle was Ipsus, and what did we say Ipsus was? Everybody remember what Ipsus is? Huh?
2016, the election.
2016.
Oh,
How did we place Ipsus in our history? The Battle of Ipsus in our history is the 2016 election when the King of the North and the King of the South are in alliance. So the first battle is 2016. The second battle is 2018, which is Heraclea. And we'll look at that, we're going to look at Heraclea in another study. The next battle is 2019, and it ends at Panium. So the next battle was Asculum, which is 2019, which is also Raphia. And it ends, the last battle, Beneventum, which is also Panium, where the King of the South begins to fall until the Sunday Law. What does it mean to begin to fall?
Means you're not dead yet.
Yeah, well, what happened?
Huh?
In all that we've been studying, how would you describe that? That he's not dead
Progressive?
yet, huh?
Progressive?
Well, yeah, but he's received a deadly wound.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, he's received a deadly wound. So we have 4 battles, all before the Sunday Law. At the Sunday Law, we have the death of the King of the South. What we did in a previous study was expand on this story and said that in the history of Panium to Sunday Law, Panium represents the deadly wound when the King of the South begins to fall, and Sunday Law is the death. And we find that in Daniel 11:40. If everybody remembers those 2 lines, Daniel 11:40 part A and part B, where we see the deadly wound, the death, and then the resurrection. In looking at 2016, we're realizing what people are battling isn't 2016, but also 2012 and 2014. Instead of just showing these battles, we went back to 2014. In 2012, Elder Parminder also has been giving us other light on 2012 and 2014 and the relationship to the early and latter reign. We're going to take it from a different perspective, which is more externally focused, because we know this is where the war is developing. If we're going to thread our waymarks, where do we begin the thread? Where do we begin?
1989
1989.
or 1979.
At the time of the end, it makes no sense to begin in the future. And you're right about 1979 as well.
Yeah.
1989 marks our time at the end. This is where we start our thread to understand what is happening in 2014. There's the link. And what is being fought over and what weapons are being used to fight. What was invented in 1989? The World Wide Web, the invention of the internet. The first workable prototype of the internet came in the late 60s with the creation of ARPANET, or the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. Originally funded by the US Department of Defense, ARPANET used packet switching to allow multiple computers to communicate on a single network. The technology continued to grow in the 70s after scientists Robert Kahn and Vinton Cerf developed Transmission Control Protocol, TCP, and Internet Protocol, IP, or TCP/IP, a communications model that set standards for how data could be transmitted between multiple networks. ARPANET adopted TCP/IP on January 1, 1983, and from there, researchers began to assemble the network of networks that became the modern internet. The online world then took on a more recognizable form in 1990 when computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. While it's often confused with the internet itself, the web is actually just the most common means of accessing data online in the form of websites and hyperlinks. The web helped popularize the internet among the public and served as a crucial step in developing the vast trove of information that most of us now access on a daily basis. In the 1980s, research at CERN in Switzerland by British computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee resulted in the World Wide Web, linking hypertext documents into an information system accessible from any node of the network. Since the mid-1990s, the internet has had a revolutionary impact on culture, commerce, and technology, including the rise of near-instant communication by electronic mail, instant messaging, voice-over internet protocol, telephone calls, two-way interactive video calls, and the World Wide Web with its discussion forums, blogs, social networking, and online shopping sites. The research and education community continues to develop the use advanced networks such as Janet in the United Kingdom and Internet 2 in the United States. Increasing amounts of data are transmitted at higher and higher speeds over fiber optic networks, including at 1 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes or more. The internet's takeover of the global communication landscape was almost instant in historical terms. It only communicated 1% of the information flowing through two-way telecommunications networks in the year 1993, already 51% by 2000, and more than 97% of the telecommunicated information by 2007. Today, the internet continues to grow, driven by ever greater amounts of online information, commerce, entertainment, and social networking. However, the future of the global internet may be shaped by regional differences in the world. So taking it back to the time of the end, 1989 is when you see the rise of the internet, the invention of the internet. We haven't gone into detail. We struggle to put computer terminology into words, but there are good YouTube videos that we are encouraged to watch that explain the difference between the World Wide Web and the internet. There's one man who has done some presentations that were helpful, how he described it. If you imagine train tracks, and I think you've seen my drawing before, not my drawing, but what I found on the internet anyways. If you imagine train tracks, it's like the structures with the train tracks being structure of the system. Then you would have A and B. A is where you're leaving from, and B is where you're arriving. The train tracks connect, they're like the underlying structure. We can connect some computers, but the real purpose and what makes computers helpful to us is not that they are connected, but that they can take us places. And those places are websites. The World Wide Web exists on top of the structure in the internet. It's like these destinations on the train stations. If I want to leave from one website and go to another website, I'm using the internet. But the actual website are not part of the internet. They're like an application that runs on top of it. When I leave one station for another station, I'm issued a ticket and it says that I left from the station A and I'm arriving at station B. You can have more information on that on your ticket. What this does is it enables people to track what I'm using the internet for. The government with the right warrant, somebody have a question? No. The government with the right warrant or without a warrant under the Patriot Act can take these tickets and see what I've used the internet for, what train stations I stopped at. There's a way to have a blank ticket, and we discussed that in the Deep Web study. The underlying structure was invented in 1969, ARPANET, The first connections between computers was developed by the US military. Even though you connected computers, they spoke different languages. They were not websites or stations. It was difficult to put out or access information. When they talk about the internet's Big Bang, they talked about 1989. Is everybody following that so far?
Yeah.
The reason they call it the Big Bang, as it's opened up the internet to be able to be used as a platform to put out and access vast amounts of information. A man called Tim Berners-Lee wrote a paper called Information Management, a Proposal. Even what he is recognizing in this invention is all about information, disseminating and accessing. In 1990, he builds the first web browser, and in 1991, it's released. These 2 years show us the invention and the release of the World Wide Web. You catch that, you're looking at 1989 to 1991, 1990, 1991, where you have the, 1991 is where you have the increase of knowledge. From the time it's first suggested to the time it's built and the time it's released. In 1996, we see that Russia conducts its first attack against the United States called Moonlight Maze. The first hack by Russia. What were they after? It wasn't to take down electricity grids, they were after information. So we've got 1969, ARPANET, then 1989, the World Wide Web. The computers back here were able to be networked together, but they couldn't do what they do with the accessing and disseminating of information without the World Wide Web, which is placed over the structure of the internet, and it connects, it brings the connections to where you can go from one place to the next. So Tim Berners-Lee writes his proposal, Information Management. In 1990, you have the first web browser. In 1991, it's released, and then 1991 to 96, then you have the first hack. Got Moonlight Maze, and I think in the notes we'll explain that a little bit more as we go forward. Also in 1996, we see news begin to go online. Google was launched, Yahoo, and Fox News. We want to also mark the development of these news sites, Fox not necessarily being internet, but we're tying it to information. But we know that they all went online. Also Krypton, the predecessor of WikiLeaks. So the first Russian hack and also the significance of the release of Google, our #1 search engine. We next come to 9/11, and the government has a difficult problem to face. Of all its surveillance laws were written in the time before the World Wide Web. Some people tell the story that many decades ago there would be a bank robbery and the police would get on their bicycles and ride down to the corner where the bank was, and they'd get it, they're too late because these new criminals were using the latest invention, the car. The policemen didn't have cars, they had bicycles. So they would always arrive too late. So they find it difficult when there's new inventions and their laws haven't kept up and the ability to track the internet. So they begin to get desperate, and it's history to be able to track people who use the World Wide Web. And someone in the class asked about Moonlight Maze, so we go into that just a little bit. Did the US have any reaction to Russia? This was kept secret for many years, and someone who wrote a book recently that opened up this story. The reason people find this interesting is because Russia also attacks in 2014, where they hacked again. What people are doing is saying Moonlight Maze looks a lot like 2014. The reason they're similar is that the United States wasn't expecting it. They were not properly coordinated in a response. For a long time, they weren't even sure who was hacking them. Both of these attacks had a poor response from the United States government. The United States has a bad habit of underestimating Russia. The government agencies were worried about how to control this new invention. Congress would not let them have any new powers until 9/11. In the fear of that date, they were able to get everything they had hoped for passed. And after fighting for years, their new powers are signed into law 45 days after 9/11. George Bush says the purpose of the Patriot Act is to bring government surveillance up to speed with the invention of the World Wide Web. He said the purpose of this law was for surveillance and communication. We looked a little bit at the Patriot Act, but we want to mention particularly that the original main author, Jim Sensenbrenner, he said since then, when he wrote the Patriot Act, that he never intended for it to be used in the way that it now is. So the words themselves are concerning. What they used it for, the mass surveillance of communication, we could see it was actually declared illegal. So you have this, tracing this history, threading the needle through here, the beginning of the internet, the World Wide Web, and the web browser is developed and then released. You have the first hack, Google, Yahoo, Fox News, and then Krypton, which is the predecessor of WikiLeaks, all online. And now we need to do something about it. So when 9/11 comes along, it gives them their reason to go ahead and do it. And they establish the Patriot Act to authorize surveillance. It's interesting that the Patriot Act was written with harmless intention, like the atomic bomb. Sometimes when we look at these things, it's fair enough that the government or the agencies, just like using cars, should be able to have some type of access, because we've seen what people do in the World Wide Web if they're completely free. There is some justification. One comment by Edward Snowden, he said about the Patriot Act, the problem with the way it's written and what it was being used for is that it allowed the government to essentially have a gun to people's heads. In his parable, it's like having a gun to their head. The government is saying, trust us because we won't pull the trigger. It seems mild and innocent. The problem, he said, is the government we have right now might not do that. They might not have used these powers, but he said one might be coming that will, which is quite similar to the atomic weapons. It all depends on who has the button, and we do hope that they are a calm and sane person. Anybody read
Well,
that
that
article
doesn't describe
on
Trump, does it?
Yeah, well, there was an article I read this morning. It was posted on Facebook too. Maybe some of you guys online saw that. It was in the Washington Post, I believe, talking about his insanity, craziness, and that people need to look at that before he goes into the next election. Looking at him psychologically and have him tested.
They should have had him. They should have did that when he was running the Republican Party. I see him right there that this man is.
Yeah.
He's not going to make it. And
he's gotten out of control. His power has gotten him way out of control.
I know he's power hungry.
Amazing.
He is the voice of the multitude.
Yeah.
He's voicing what so many people feel and can't say.
In 2004, what?
That's why they keep him.
In 2004, we marked two men that restrained George Bush, the president at that time, Robert Mueller and James Comey. What happened to James Comey a couple of years ago? He was fired by Donald Trump because he was trying to restrain the president. There's one other man that restrained George Bush, and that was Robert Mueller. The same two people in 2004 were holding back George Bush. I don't think, and if anybody remembers that story, I don't know, I know the details aren't fresh in my mind, but when Ashcroft was in the hospital, very ill, they were trying to get the Patriot Act reinstated because it was going to expire, something along those lines, okay?
Extended,
okay, extended, that's the word.
I remember that, but I don't remember the term.
And it was James Comey. It was James Comey that was the acting attorney general.
No, Ashcroft was acting.
No, Ashcroft was the attorney general. He was in the hospital, and James Comey was acting attorney general while he was in the hospital. Ashcroft's husband called
I
Comey.
thought acting is who's actually, and then who's standby is the one who's like standing in for. So I thought, okay, never mind. I'm wrong.
Oh, I could have it backwards, but James Comey was the one that was filling in for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Ashcroft's wife called Comey, knowing somewhat of what was going on. I don't remember the details are kind of fuzzy on me. But so James Comey was rushing to the hospital, but James Comey also knew the people that he was up against, and he wanted to have a witness around for what they might do. So he actually called Mueller. And so Mueller and James Comey went to the hospital room of John Ashcroft, where they were trying to to, and I don't remember the two guys, maybe somebody remembers their names, and I know them if I heard the names again, but they were trying to get him to sign this extension. So I don't think it's a coincidence in our history, those two have been the ones particularly who are holding Trump back. At this time, we began to consider the external of 2014. We understand from the line of the priest, 2014 is a waymark. What waymark is it? It's a Sunday law. We've traced our thread through our histories, and just in case anybody still needs to, not that we're going to go into a deep study on it, but when it comes to the Sunday law, what are we now understanding constitutes a Sunday law?
Union of church and state.
Union of church and state. And do we see that? Do we see that happening in 1979? In 1989?
Beginning to, because you're getting, like I was talking about, the 700 Club, that's when they started trying to get the Protestants elected
Right,
in the government. And
right. So you see that union happening. So there's a significant change again here in 2014, bringing us closer to it. So it's Sunday law. We've traced our thread through our histories, and this is a simple version. If we want to go into more detail, we can look into the court cases and how society is changing in those years. But if they call that the internet's Big Bang, they're talking about a rapid change in the way we process information as a society. We can see much in that history. We can start with this template, but it can also keep growing. So we had in our history then, the red is our history, and there we are able to thread the needle, and their events coincide, is that right, parallel with our events. And I don't have them all on there, but we can mark parallels with each one of the events, external and internal. That's the external line. When we consider 2014, the key is to look at the internal, and we can see a precedent for looking at the internal to understand the external. If we're going to understand the external, we can compare and contrast, or we can see that from Acts 27. Why can we see it from Acts 27? We need to understand the external of 2014. Can we understand the external by understanding the internal? This is just a basic line that we'll eventually build on here. Yes, and how do we know that from Acts 27? We see the one ship, Alexandria, at every waymark on this journey, had application for Adventism in the United States. So if everybody remembers all the studies that we went through and other ones that you've done when it comes to going through all these presentations of Acts 27, the ship of Alexandria starts in 1798, and you can see parallel events, internal and external, all along the way. The story of those two structures parallel at every waymark, and we can make a story that runs through them. Even in our reform line is 1989 to 1991, which we just discussed when it came to the internet. Are these 2 years our story internally? We have an increase of knowledge internally. 1996 is formalization. Just as we're seeing internal events, we're also seeing external events that coincide with our experience. If we're having trouble understanding one, we can consider the other. One thing people have had difficulty understanding is what a Sunday law would look like in 2014. We've tried to come up with different stories like Obamacare. We're forced to try to come up with these narratives that Obama brought in healthcare, and that's a Sunday law. When we look at it as a very weak argument, but we weren't sure what to do about 2014 because we don't see anything from the government that looks like a violation of the Constitution, which is interesting because when I finally got through all this, putting together these notes, I got the picture, and I pray that we all do. Maybe you all have it, and I'm just the slow one again. But why is it that we don't see anything from the government as a violation of the Constitution? There's the ship of Alexandria from 1798 all the way down here to 2019. And it goes beyond. This particular line was one from another study, but it goes to the Sunday law. If we remember that the lines or the ropes are the ones that hold it together until Sunday law. But we saw parallel events all along the way between internal and external. When we looked at the internal, we saw that in 2012, a message came from Britain into the United States. Was that message received? No, it was rejected. It was opposed and fought against. The message of time, predicting 2014, came and was rejected. In 2013, this message had two opponents. One was the leaders, and one was the internal enemies. The internal enemies were Path of the Just. This internal enemy is opposing not just the leader, but also the message. But there's also problems between the internal enemies and leadership. They begin to split in 2013. 2014 comes, and as we looked at earlier, whether we were ready or not, it was going to be Sunday law, and it was Sunday law for this movement, even though we had not accepted it. We don't have a choice. So now we have to understand it, what had happened there. So internally, on the internal, you have a message that comes from Britain to the United States, and that message was come to Elder Parminder in 2013, and it's rejected here in 2012. And the leader in 2013 you have is Elder Jeff. The internal enemies are Path of the Just. The internal enemies are opposing not just the message of time, but also Jeff himself and the leadership of this movement. When we come to the external, it would be good to consider where this message comes from. When we look at the internal, we look at who's leading this movement, and if we wanted to know what the message was in this history, could we follow the leader? No. Could you follow the loudest voices in the movement? No. The message came through a different channel. It didn't come through the leadership. So the message of time, Elder Jeff is the leader. It didn't come from Elder Jeff, okay? So we compare and contrast externally, where is this Sunday law going to come from? It came out of Great Britain, referring back to the internal, and entered into the United States in 2012. In 2013, the Patriot Act is under discussion in the United States government. Who is opposing any type of Sunday law in this history? The leaders and internal enemies. There's a couple of things happening in 2013. The internal leader, Elder Jeff, external leader, Obama. Then we can see internal enemies, Path of the Just fighting Elder Jeff, and the message from Britain. Not just the message from Britain, but the person associated with it, Elder Parminder. In the external history, a message comes from Britain. And if anybody hasn't already watched those presentations by Aaron Sen, they're worth watching when he goes through this history. That Elder Parminder was actually told to not teach this message. And he passed his test of obedience. Go ahead.
Where are those located?
Say that again.
Where are those presentations located?
Oh, it's been a while now. Romania's website, Romania's YouTube page. Ask the Romanians. They know where to find it.
What is the guy's name?
Aaron Sen.
I think you can put his name.
Yeah, probably you can put Aaron Sen 2012, 2014 in a YouTube search. Or you can put it in the chat. Adriana will put it in the chat. I don't know how to pronounce the word virtual. Is what it says on their YouTube channel. Yeah, I see the look on your face. I don't even like try. So I figured you could tell them. And that's where they're at, I'm pretty sure. On the Romanian channel, right? There you go. Some people know how to roll their tongue. I don't know how to do that. So let's see. Let me find my place. So internal is Jeff and the external is Obama. Then we can see the internal enemies, Path of Just fighting Elder Jeff, and the message from Britain, not just the message from Britain, but the person associated with it, and that's Elder Parminder. In the external history, a message comes from Britain. That is the Sunday law in 2014. It can't come through the government. They're not going to use it or introduce it. The reason is Obama is president, and there's internal enemies. The internal enemy that we're marking is Edward Snowden. In 2013, he took the largest leak in known history of government documents, and it related to the Patriot Act. He's uncovering all this history. People are so angry, there's not just one enemy to the Patriot Act. He inspires hundreds of thousands, you can say millions, all over the world to start protesting government surveillance in the use of information. Since that time, even other applications, many of us use WhatsApp, and you'll notice that they use encryption. Much of the precautions that we see today, like the use of encryption for WhatsApp, are directly related to Edward Snowden in the leaks that he exposed in 2013. When Google and all these other major corporations were made aware that the government was using backdoor entries to access information. The reason WhatsApp is encrypted, we can thank Edward Snowden. Not just WhatsApp, but many other of our services. We're marking Snowden at 2013 because the internal enemies begin at 2013. We mark Edward Snowden because he begins his leaking in 2013 and it ends around June 2014. You can see the external in 2013, Path of the Just, begin to fall away and completed in 2014. You can mark the leadership through the external history, but the internal enemies are placed at 2013. So you've got the message that comes internally, that's the message of time, and then you've got this message as well coming here from Great Britain to the United States. Obama is the one in place on the external, Jeff is the one in place on the internal. You've got internal enemies, the Path of the Just, and you got internal enemies, Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden does his release beginning in 2013, ends around June 2014. Path of the Just begins to fall away, and they're gone at 2014. Cambridge Analytica, if we trace it back to its roots, takes us to 1989. We're going to give a couple of pieces of information so that we're able to look for ourselves and do some research. We'll mention some of the people. Nigel Oakes, where is he based? Nigel Oakes is the one in Great Britain. He begins to study in 1989 on how to manipulate behavior, Behavioral Dynamics Working Group. Then we have Behavioral Dynamics Institute. In 1993 begins SCL, Strategic Communications Laboratory. What he has done is begin a new type of study in human behavior, but they're beginning to use this new development or invention of the World Wide Web. Nigel Oakes says they're using the same methods as Aristotle and Hitler. He develops this company designed to manipulate people, starts selling his new abilities, and they claim to be the most successful in the world at doing this. In 2012, SCL enters the United States, comes out of Great Britain, and its purpose is to begin working for the Republican Party. They had just lost an election to Obama, and this is their new weapon. The study that they've done in this previous history is not that strong. They can't do a great deal with it. The reason they haven't developed a stronger method, they haven't used the web to its full potential. In 2013, two men become involved. Christopher Wiley, and we'll discuss the other one in the next slide, who become their director of research and has an idea. If we use people's information from social media, we can create algorithms and then we can manipulate their behavior. So following along on the line here as we continue to go through this story, just to review again, the internet is created here, but it's just a structure of which the World Wide Web is laid over. And the World Wide Web allows you to get on a train at station A and go to station B. And it also opens up the door for government surveillance, well, what they want to do, but it also leaves a trail of where you were and where you're going to go as it continues on. You get to the web browser being invented in 1990. By 1991, the web browser is released. You've got two things going on here for both the external and the internal, the time of the end and an increase of knowledge, both happening here with the development of the web. In 1996, we'll skip this one just for now, for a minute. 1996, you have Moonlight Maze was the first hack. That's also the formalization of the message. You got Google, Yahoo, Fox News, and Krypton going online. And SCL, Strategic Communications Laboratory, comes in 1993. But back here in 1989, you also have the Behavioral Dynamics Working Group and the Behavioral Dynamics Institute. This work is going to be from what he says himself, studying Hitler, using the same methods as Hitler and Aristotle to manipulate people's minds. So while the internet is being introduced, you also have somebody else working on how to manipulate people's minds. Come 2013, you got Christopher Wiley, who becomes the director of the research, and he has an idea, and that is to start using our social media to gather up information on us, the algorithms that we can manipulate their behavior. Any questions on that? Am I missing anything? We'll go into the details of what it looks like in another study, but it sounds just a little bit bad, if it sounds a little bad, and we have no idea how bad it actually is. What they did with all the new development has changed the world as we know it, and it was done under the leadership of Steve Bannon, someone who wants to change the US government. He says the period we are currently in is the fourth great change in the United States. It's amazing he says fourth, right? The fourth generation. The fourth turning point. He says the first is the American Revolution, the second is the Civil War, the third, the Depression and World War II, and the fourth is now, our day. Whenever there is truth, there is false or error. Sometimes it seems the worse the error is, the more it looks like the truth. This is Steve Bannon saying this. That's the art of the counterfeit. He's not wrong comparing what we have now to the American Revolution, except he was overseeing it. He's using this company as a purpose, which became Cambridge Analytica. What they were doing in 2014, we can research this on our own time. It was designed to build a new weapon called by some people that work for the company, particularly Christopher Wiley, as Steve Bannon's new weapon to fight his culture war on revolution. So the internal and the external from 2012 going forward, you've got this message that comes from Great Britain. This is the message of time. Comes into the United States by Elder Parminder. It's rejected by the leader, Elder Jeff. In 2013, we're marking the internal enemies. You've got the internal enemies that are fighting against Elder Jeff as well as against the message. And from 2013 to 2014, they begin their fall, and by 2014, they're gone. You've got the Nigel Oakes and SCL coming in, Steve Bannon involved with this, and how to manipulate people's minds. You've got internal, on the external, you have Obama as the leader and internal enemies marking Edward Snowden. I don't know if anybody saw it, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but I did just order it. It's a new book that's coming out early September on Edward Snowden.
Elaine,
yeah.
Would you just review quickly, why is Edward Snowden internal enemy?
The internal enemy?
Yeah, I'm just trying to...
The internal enemy when it comes to the United States, because Edward Snowden is the one that released all the stuff that was going on involving the Patriot Act, all the government surveillance that was going on. And you can actually, I'm pretty sure you can find it on YouTube. There's a movie called Edward Snowden, if anybody hasn't watched that. And it shows what he did. And isn't he in Russia? Is he the one that's in Russia today?
He's in Russia.
Really?
Yeah.
Putin watched Guardian.
Yeah, which is interesting. So Edward Snowden is the one that released all the stuff, and you watch the movie, get more details out of it. But he was hired on because of his skills. I don't know what you call it, his intelligence, his skills, and for the work that he was doing with the CIA, I believe it was. Maybe somebody can correct me if that was wrong. But he was highly intelligent, and so. But some of the work that they were doing. It is kind of interesting that I think you guys all know what I'm trying to say. You can be involved in a work and not really know the purpose for which the work is. You could be told that, for whatever the reason, you're doing this great work for a great purpose, and you have no idea what they're really using it for.
A-bomb
Yeah, so so they're developing these things and they don't know the motives of the people they're doing it for. And so Edward Snowden came to see what was going on, and he literally, the movie kind of details it out. How accurate it is, I can't say, but it shows that the lengths that he had to go to in order to get this information downloaded and escape with it. And that's why, if I understood correctly, why he fled the country, because he knew that they would kill him. So let's see here.
They have a video with Edward Snowden and it says hero or traitor.
Yeah, I think that's the one I watched.
He was stuck at the Russian terminal for a really long time because Russia didn't want to let him in either.
Yeah.
So there was quite a bit of time that I'm sure Putin must have been wondering what to do.
I tend to get this Julian Assange and Edward Snowden sometimes mixed up in my head. I can see the two different faces, and but I think it was Snowden. Yeah, because it was in the movie. It was Snowden. I don't remember it being Russia that he first went to, but he had it all arranged. But he went somewhere else. Maybe it was Russia, but I don't think it was Russia. I think he went to China or something. And highly secretive China, Hong Kong, yes.
Was it? Yeah, I think it was.
And that's where he just kept releasing all this stuff. And
so in Hong Kong was where he met the reporters. He couldn't do it in the United States.
Yes.
He met them in Hong Kong, and it ended up in this really weird situation where the U.S. was trying to get him extradited, but Hong Kong, they don't like the U.S., so they were dragging their feet, and it gave Snowden just enough time to get out of there and get on a plane to Russia, to St. Petersburg or Moscow. I don't know. I think it was I don't remember which one it was. But he was going to go from there somewhere else. He just hadn't figured it out yet, but he got stuck. And then Russia wouldn't let him in, but he couldn't leave. And it was really...
So anyways, he was the internal enemy, marking the internal enemy in the United States for exposing all that. So let me see if I can figure out where I was at. He's using the company as a purpose, which became Cambridge Analytica. What they were doing in 2014, we can research this in our own time. It was designed to build a new weapon called by some people that work for the company, particularly Christopher Riley, as Steve Bannon's new weapon to fight his culture war on revolution. We did read that. So Steve Bannon was the vice president of Cambridge Analytica. He formed it from SCL, the Strategic Communications Laboratory. I'm trying to remember these things. I think it was communications, with the purpose of working in the next US election and bring about this revolution or change. He also used SCL to create another company, Aggregate IQ. It was then based out of Canada. SCL comes from Britain. They branch into the United States to work in the American election, but then they branch into Canada, and through that more hidden route, they bring about Brexit. The referendum where people chose to remove Britain from the European Union. Steve Bannon said that was as much as part of the strategy as was to Donald Trump. Hopefully, what we can see that there is a lot of information and a lot of things going on right now. These are key threads showing what is fundamentally changing in our history. Much of it stems from Cambridge Analytica's work in 2014. If we look at the internet in 2014, with the Sunday law, just the same. The person that we mark. Somebody have a question?
That was you, Kathleen.
It was what?
That was you, Kathleen.
Oh, okay. The person that we mark in 2012 is Elder Parminder. He begins preaching, and in 2016, he's anointed. In the external, the person that Steve Bannon wanted elected, hidden behind the history of 2013 to 2014, was Donald Trump. In 2015, Trump announces his candidacy, and he begins on the campaign trail. He's preparing a different message. In 2016, Trump is elected. So you've got, in 2015, Trump begins his candidacy. You've got Parminder beginning his preaching. And in a sense, Trump is doing his preaching, right? In 2016.
Sorry, you have who doing what preaching?
Elder Parmenter begins preaching in 2015.
Uh-huh.
In 2015, Trump begins his candidacy.
Okay.
In 2015, Trump announces his candidacy and he begins the campaign trail and he's preaching a different message. If he's a Republican, he's preaching a different Republican message. In 2016, Trump is elected. By comparing and contrasting, we can understand what is happening in our history and have more light both on internal and external. If we want to know what the message of Sunday law was in 2014, we know it did not come from the leaders. It did not come from Congress. Nowhere in the United States government. It came from another source that was rising up in this history. So this is why I think, for my own self anyways, I better understood it, that we can come to understand the Sunday law is not what we think it is. Because here in the United States, we're saying, there's no Sunday law, but it's this union of church and state that is being brought about by these different entities that are taking place. In 2012, you have the message of time given to Elder Parmenter. The message comes to the United States, it's rejected. Somebody gonna say something?
Yeah, not to interrupt you, Sister Elaine, but can you explain to Sister Allie that Trump is not Parmenter, that they're just comparison of the external and internal, what's happening going on?
Can you ask your question, Allie?
No, I just was having a discussion with Brother John just a minute ago. Just what you were saying about Trump starting his campaign on 2015, and 2015 Parmenter or Elder was beginning to teach or preach or whatever. So
Yeah.
I was paralleling it, that Trump is Parmenter, because Tess put on the line that Jeff is Pope Francis for that parallel at that time period.
Yeah.
So that's what I was adding to this.
Thank you. Yes, it is. That's like a whole nother story that I haven't heard yet, but I've seen it, and I know how I've seen her do that. I don't know that I could explain it, but I know she's done that. And it comes to do with Adriana taught this one because it was in the one that I started to do. It has to do with the line of success and failure somewhat as well, right?
Which one are you talking about?
It was number 9 in the Canada study, where she marks Francis as Elder Jeff as Pope Francis.
Yeah. Because, no.
Wasn't it that they were half wrong and half right?
Elder Jeff is Pope
Didn't do
Benedict.
their job, like Francis.
Elder Jeff is Pope Benedict, because Pope Benedict is the one who threw the mantle to Pope Francis and endorsed him, but then completely undermined his whole message.
Okay.
Pope Francis is the new leader. Pope Benedict is the old, but they're both alive at the same time. So Benedict is the old one.
Francis is the new.
She did say it accidentally, I'm pretty sure, because that would not make sense, because it was Pope Benedict who endorsed Francis, but completely undermined his
Because I was pretty
message.
sure I saw Francis on the board.
Yeah.
Did it say Francis on the board?
Yeah, I think she messed it up.
Okay. So let's see.
Before you move forward, Jonathan has a question. Brother Jonathan has
Go ahead, John.
It's in the chat. He says.
What's going on with the chat?
I can't read it while I'm on the slide.
So
It's
Pope. He's saying so. Parmenter is Pope Francis. Jeff is Benedict.
Yeah, that's what we just, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Steve Banity, formed Cambridge Analytica. I don't remember how far I got, so.
Sister Debbie had a good question. She said, would Snowden equate to Benedict Arnold of the American Revelation days?
No idea. I think we did read this whole slide. No idea.
Have we ever actually put the Revelation, that time period on a line?
No.
I have to go back and understand. I know he was a traitor, but so I get that they were both considered traitors, but was Benedict Arnold a traitor for our good? Because that's kind of what Snowden is. I just don't remember the history. All I remember from history is that he was a traitor, marked as a traitor. But what Snowden did was you know, it was viewed and demonized as a traitor to the United States, but what he actually did was expose all the surveillance that was going on.
Yeah, Sister Angela says, I'm not too sure what some of the terms, but IMO, don't know that's Edward Snowden is a hero.
In my opinion.
Oh, in my opinion, Edward Snowden is a hero for exposing the totalitarian designs, materially and ideologically, for those ANG. Among the worst of the U.S. It was either Elijah or Elisha who was despised by an evil apostate king because he knew the king's ugly secrets. Edward Snowden served the American public as a true patriot, but sadly, when his foes rejected and threatened him, went over to an equally evil regime, Russia.
And it all makes it look to people's eyes as what they say is true. He must have been a bad guy. You know what I mean? And it's really interesting because I don't know, where was I 5 years ago, 10 years ago, listening to all this stuff, thinking, yeah, that guy's a traitor. No idea what's going on. You know what I mean? That what he was really doing.
I didn't think he was a traitor. I think it was crazy. Obama had like these laws against whistleblowers where they could all, I'm like,
yeah,
we should know this stuff. Why are you treating them like that's crazy?
That's right. That's right.
The thing I find interesting about Snowden is that when he was traitor against the country, I was against Obama and how he was treating him. But now everything's kind of reversed and changed, and I'm still for Snowden. Like, I don't understand how I can have the same mentality that what he did was right, but my political opinion was different. I was anti-Democrat, kind of pro-Republican in my mentality. But no matter which political aspect I was after, Snowden was still not the enemy. I find that kind of, I don't know, it's just a thought.
I think what Sister Tess is saying, he kind of is in the respect in the model of, because we had enemies within and then there's enemies in the US and the Snowden represents the enemies.
Enemies that seem
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I guess if you're enemies to Satan's kingdom, then you're not quite enemies to us.
So going back to the Sunday law, with the trouble that we had with understanding and trying to use Obama and Obamacare and all that, I look at my own self. I feel so inadequate and incapable, but I also know it's the Holy Spirit that is guiding us through these. But when it comes to trying to see this, you have to have some sort of guidance guiding you to see. You know, I can see it when it's laid out, but going forward, I don't know how to, other than to admit a weakness. It's like, is it a gift? What is it? But I'm thankful that the Lord is opening these things up, and I just pray that every one of us are able to keep up with it as we go along. But going back to like the Sunday law issue, that what the end of this study kind of finally helped me to grasp, you know, why we're not seeing a Sunday law like we think it should look like. It actually came from Great Britain, this attack for this revolution. Bannon wants this revolution, and this attack on it, and it comes not from the government. So if it was a Sunday law, as we would think it would be, it would have to come from the government, but it doesn't come from the government. And that's what's building this union of church and state. Did I say that right?
It's not coming from the government?
It's not coming from the government.
From Protestants, right?
But it's coming from, yeah, but it,
The Protestants are in charge of the government, isn't it?
yeah, but what brought this about was the work going all the way back to Cambridge Analytica, back before that to Nigel Oakes, to develop into Cambridge Analytica, SCL, then to SCL to Cambridge Analytica, to Steve Bannon, who's this radical right wing, right? And he wants to overturn the government as we know it. And it would seem that his idea of overturning the government as we know it is using these Protestants and drawing. I don't know how to. I don't know. I'm not saying it right.
Because I sent this in chat earlier, because this is what Sister Tess was saying, is we need to look at the Sunday law from this perspective of Steve Bannon and him going to the Vatican, because Steve Bannon is a Catholic and
Right.
he's a conservative Catholic at that, and he does not like Pope Francis. While he was at Breitbart, their articles were like a slap in the face to what Pope Francis was doing, because he's liberal and he's against his agenda. And so Steve Bannon, he seems to have the mindset of a conservative right-wing America.
Exactly. That's
And
what
it's
he
not
is.
that he's trying to destroy the establishment. He's trying to bring in what he thinks the establishment should look like.
Right.
So if he's Catholic, it's still kind of, I don't know. And if he's with the Sunday law, it's still something there.
That makes me think of the discussion that someone said the other day. I don't know if it was during the Friday study or what. My mind is kind of all over the place. But that Pope Francis wouldn't be the one leading. It would be somebody else in his place. That because I guess Pope Francis is more on the liberal side and for I guess more freedom for women and all that kind of stuff. And they would need someone who is more of kind of conservative to be in that place. I don't know, someone said something like that.
We were talking about that last night.
I know, yeah.
And then today I was talking about it when I put that link in there.
So that would mean, is that what it's saying, that was having someone like Steve Bannon in there?
No, because he's conservative. So for him to get the help from the Vatican that he wants from Catholics, it's not going to be Pope Francis. It would have to be a pope that's conservative.
Right. Oh, so it's okay. So
because you have SDA that are gone conservative, you have Protestants that have gone conservative. Only Catholic Church is liberal right now. They also, for the whole world to be on the wrong side, and I think the Catholics, since they are so much of the whole world, need to also be on the conservative. There's those that escape from there, but I mean, they all have to be on the wrong side of the stream altogether.
And they're not the king of the north right now.
They're not.
Anyways, the United States is the king of the north.
Yeah. But that's a weird thing to have the Catholic Church
being liberal
on the right side of the issue. That's the thing. Like, I know they're not the Babylon
here.
here.
People to understand it.
Yeah, it's weird.
Very hard for Adventists to understand that.
Oh.
So I just threw this slide in there because this is the end of this study, but I threw this slide in there because we did talk about threading the needle, just to kind of refresh our memories. This again is not a complete one. You can go all the way back to 1979. I just pulled in one from the older ones to just demonstrate you've got these events that all coincide along the way. They're not all listed there, but just to give you the idea of it, you've got Ipsis, Heraclea, Asculum, and then you're going to continue on to Beneventum, Raphia. And also how the Millerites, they only had the internal.
You mean Panium, right?
Panium. Yeah, what did I say?
You said Asculum.
Well, here, Ipsis, Heraclea, Asculum, and then Beneventum, which is Panium.
Yeah, you said Asculum after Beneventum.
Oh, okay. So light comes to us and we have to accept it. We must see and identify. Thank you. Sorry about that. We must see and identify internal and external events without conspiracy theories. And we must determine the truth by prophecy. So how do we see these things? Like the links that I sent to Sister Adriana yesterday about Trump. No, not Trump. Koch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Koch.
Yeah, it's pronounced Koch.
Koch. And so, so I think I'm thinking of Mayor Koch. so seeing two different articles from the same news outlet. It's called The Week. Is that what it was? Called The Weekly? The Week?
Oh, The Weekend.
The Week.
The Weekend.
Okay. That these two articles, and they both seem to contradict each other. How do you know? How are we going to know? We're going to know because the lines are going to show us. The more we understand the lines, the more we can understand the events that are taking place from the right perspective. So we really need to understand prophecy and how God is directing us through the lines all the way through. And then I think I threw one more in here. It was just back to the ship of Alexandria again, and that was it. Okay. Questions or comments? Nobody? Nobody ever wants to comment until I say, okay, let's close up, and then they all want to comment.
Well, Sister Angela, she put in the chat that ultramontane Catholics ultramontane Catholics, very conservative clergy, and laity hate republicanism, Protestantism, the U.S. Constitution, individual conscience, freedom of religion. Their loyalty is to the papacy, not any country.
Okay.
Okay, we can close out of all that. And, but nobody has questions or comments or discussion?
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I have a comment or question.
Yes.
So, I'm confused on the Sunday law. You're giving history right now, right? And so are you leading up to what it's going to be, or how it's going to present itself, or do you know how it's going to present itself? I'm a little confused on that part.
Yeah, that takes going back a ways. But what I think, if I'm understanding your question, you may or may not be up to speed on some of the things that have happened in the last year or so developed in the message.
Well, I've heard a lot, like I've listened to David Gates on, what he says, and then Ted Wilson says there's nothing in the pipeline, and that, so I've heard a lot of different things, and I listened to some of or Tessa's stuff, but not all of it. And I used to listen to Jeff and Parmenter, but I haven't, I don't know, for a while. I've listened to a lot of different people. So that's probably what I'm.
Yeah, I hate to tell you to go to one video or two, or this video or that video without a lot of background, but there's one in Romania where he covers it. But, maybe
if you can give me whatever you think, I'll listen.
Yeah, maybe try to go through the whole process of the studies in Canada.
I have jumped around. Probably my problem.
You what?
She jumped around.
I've jumped around on different videos,
Yeah.
So I know lots of holes missing, information of holes missing.
Yeah, I would maybe try to go through the presentations in Canada.
Okay. What months or what dates?
In June, right? They were back in June. We're in August, right?
If you just YouTube Tess Lambert, Alberta, it'll give you the whole playlist.
Yeah.
Or Future News Canada. You can go to that one on YouTube, and you can go to the latest videos.
Future News Canada, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the YouTube channel. And if you go to YouTube, go to that.
And
okay.
I don't have the quote handy if anybody has it handy, but just to try to summarize, when this first kind of came, that's when it was first kind of, I can hear it going that direction. Some presentations earlier, but where it was most clearly stated that what we've always been looking for is a Sunday law, a decree that is better understood based on other statements that she's made in more careful reading, that the union of church and state means the acceptance of a spurious Sabbath. So it's not looking at a decree, a Sunday law decree, but a union of church and state. And they're interchangeable.
So it kind of has a different face on it than what we thought all along. Is that what you're saying, kind of?
Yes. And that process, because I don't think you were with us on the earlier study, because I think we touched on it a little bit in the earlier study as well, but that process actually began way back in 1979 by the raising up of Jerry Falwell, raising up the moral majority to get involved with the Republican politics to get Ronald Reagan elected into office. And so the forming of that union beginning way back in 1979 and going through steps and processes that this nation has gone, that when you come to 2014, what we're talking about here is 2014 marks a very important waymark that on the line of the priest, if you're up to speed at all with that, marks a Sunday law for the priest. This all comes to going back.
Yeah, I think I do understand that part.
Okay, good. And it all comes from looking at the great controversy chapter 38, and better understanding that she's not giving a fractal view of the priests and the Levites and the Nethinim. She's just giving the big picture of the Sunday law, which is a union of church and state when the message goes to the world. And
So read chapter 38 and then go to the other. Okay.
Yeah, and then what we're experiencing is those events through I don't know, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but prophetically seeing these events that are going along the way that are leading us, but we're experiencing the same sequence of events. So in the Great Controversy, she follows it through. You have a Sunday law, you have then you have a cry, and then you have a close of probation. So the Sunday law always comes before the close of probation. And so what is understood is 2014 marks the Sunday law for the priests, leading up to their close of probation in 2019.
Okay.
So
the links that are posted there, Shelley.
Say that again.
There's two links that are posted in the room. If you go to the second one, the one that Christine posted, that'll take you to a playlist for the Canadian videos.
Okay.
And of tests, and I would just go straight through those ones as quickly as you can.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. You're welcome.
It can be confusing, yeah, if you don't hang on like you guys seem to be doing.
Yeah. Do you? You're Kathy's sister, right?
Correct. Yes.
Do you get DVDs from her?
I live clear down Klamath Falls, so I haven't been up there lately. So I used to a long time ago, but kind of been out of touch because I've been down here, and I used to go up there often, but I haven't in quite a while. So not a long time.
If you can use any DVDs, or if you have internet access and don't care about the DVDs, I mean, if you need some DVDs, I can send them to you in the mail.
I'm happy with the internet. I listen to stuff that you send me. I mean, not everything because I don't have time, but you send me stuff.
Yeah, okay.
I'm on your mailing list or email list.
Yeah, I remember she asked me to add you, and yeah, there's quite a few of us that are teaching different aspects of the message, but yeah, start with, I guess, the Canada presentations. It depends on how much you know about this message, but basically, from everything that we've been understanding, people that have come in the last year to this, they're all on equal ground because all of us are having to unlearn a lot of things and relearn. So in some cases, it's good that they didn't learn certain things because they have much to unlearn. And so
I started listening to Jeff in, I don't know, it was like 2008 or 9 or.
Yeah.
And so this will give you an idea. So that when Zoom was doing, they only did 10-minute intervals, not Zoom, YouTube. So I would listen to 10 minutes of Jeff about 10 times because I could not understand line upon line. It took me forever to understand line upon line. So I would listen to him in 10-minute intervals. So that was quite a while ago that I used to listen to. And I finally got it, but it was like pounding nails in my head to understand line upon line.
I think we've all been there on some of these topics too.
Right.
The thing that we've learned through a lot of Sister Tessa's studies, and we kind of touched on it I only briefly mentioned it, but the ship in Acts 27 that she goes through, those are some really good studies to go through, and I'll send you some links to go through that. And
okay.
But it shows you how the ship of Alexandria is the ship that begins in 1798. It represents the United States and Adventism, both institutions, and they go all the way to Sunday law. When you get close to Sunday law, that's in the story where the ship is breaking apart, and they're wrapping the ropes around the ship. Well, they're undergirding the ship, and undergirding the ship means they're wrapping these ropes around it. These ropes represent the lines, line upon line. So the thing that holds the two institutions together is the line upon lines, and these lines are part of Ezekiel. There are Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, all these things that look like chaos, until you keep stacking one line of history over another line of history over another line of history, and that rope is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and developing into a cord. And that cord is what holds it all together until there's nothing left but to swing across. That you're probably familiar with, right?
Right. And Parminder actually, when Parminder came on the scene, he actually made it a lot easier to understand. Jeff was like listening to Russian, you know, and then Parminder made it English.
Oh,
You know, that's an easy way to say it. So it was more simple, which I appreciated.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, so, okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? Before we close in prayer? No? Okay, let's pray. I want to ask if Brother Jonathan would like to pray. Or how about, is Brother Henry still there?
Yeah, would you like to pray? Trying to get.
Our dear precious Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you very much for this time that we could go glean through history and also see the different parallels and recognize the time that we're living in and so many other different things. Lord, we just want to thank you for every blessing and for this Sabbath day. We pray that you will continue to lead and guide us, and where we do have questions or misunderstandings, I pray that you will continue to open up our minds and give us the understanding that we need through your Holy Spirit. And we ask that throughout the remainder of this Sabbath day, that you will also continue to bless us and we just thank you for everything that you're doing and for preparing us for the days that are before us. We thank you for hearing and answering our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.